Let me have that pen a minute, and that's enough, Mother. That's enough.
Even off the house. One night, Mother woke us all up, and I'm sure she'd been up an hour herself, because I guess like any mother, she checks her babies in the night. And Uncle Bill was about, he was less than 3 years old. He probably was more like 2 years old, or maybe even less. But anyway, in the night, Mother discovered that Bill was missing. And she couldn't find him by herself, so we were all awakened. The whole family got up and hunted for Uncle Bill. And we hunted everywhere. And of course, we were frightened because of the canal close by that he had undoubtedly walked in his sleep, and if he had walked into the canal, he could have been drowned, you know. So we searched and searched and searched every place, the barns, even in the trees. He could have climbed a tree. Of course, because that's where I spent most of my childhood, was in trees. They were really my home. And finally, somebody thought to look through the house, and we found him curled up in the fireplace. Of course, there was no ashes or anything in there because the summertime, of course, but there was here he was curled up in the fireplace, and we thought of all the unlikely things. And one of the children asked him if he was waiting for Santa Claus. Well, to the best of my knowledge, the Chandler Ranch was homesteaded in. Wait just a minute. We're sitting on the top of the Mokeowen Rim at this point on a trip down to Phoenix, and we've stopped overlooking Strawberry Valley. And you can see part of the field from here that was our Strawberry Ranch, and it was just a deer place, well built, and had a long lane, a wide lane leading clear down to the house, because the house was set way back, close to where the creek was in the backyard, and that creek was just a little ferry boat place where the columbine and wildflowers and even wild strawberries. I think this is the reason the Strawberry Valley was named this. There were lots of wild strawberries along this little creek, and it ran right across our land at the back, and the house was set down. It was just like a backyard. The creek was there, part of our yard, and it was just a natural garden place to wander and dream. And the wide lane, you can go ahead, Mary, you can travel. The wide lane was bordered by rail fences on each side, well built, and two big barns and a big corral that was part of the whole plan. The whole layout was nicely planned. Yes.
There's a welcome woman.
You got it? Well, I'm reminded now because we've just passed through Pine, I pointed out the Miller house. Miller built a 2-story stone house for his little Western bride, and he was quite a figure in the town of Pine always, because I think he was probably the only man who had a college education, and he was the school teacher and acted as a lawyer, and I really don't know a great deal about him except that he was on a little higher level socially. Not that he never participated, I'm sure, in all the Mrs. Miller was from a Mormon family. I don't know anything about her past.
You said something about Bud.
Well, Bud Miller was the son. They had a number of children. I think 8 or 9 or something like that. The reason I am led up to this Miller family is because Bud Miller married my sister, and his sister, by the name of Chloe Miller, married Bill Heath. Bill Heath is the cattleman who bought our Strawberry Ranch when we sold it. See? So this is how I got led up to the Miller family. The natural bridge is
on all the time?
no, 5 miles from Pine, and we just passed the road turning off it. This was always a special Sunday trip that we would take down to the natural bridge, and I did tell you something about these good fellows that operated. They were from Scotland, and with quite a brogue, and they were such industrious, very interesting, vital people. And they had one son and one daughter, and I think I mentioned that the daughter graduated from Tempe as a school teacher, and that she and I and Edith Mullen, who lived in Tempe, the 3 of us went to Berkeley to summer school. I think I mentioned that. One of the features that people used to always tell about them was the most beautiful kitchen stove, one of these great, big, sparkling ranges that was the pride and joy of Mrs. Goodfellow, because she not only served meals, to tourists, and they had some rooms to rent, some accommodation, overnight accommodation, but all of the workmen, they had farmhands. There's a little farm there that took a lot of work, and they had an orchard, and she did lots of canning, all the fruits and vegetables. She had an orchard and a garden, and she canned everything. They were very self-sustaining, and I want to tell you about that stove. I don't know where the stove came from, but it was shipped in evidently with a great deal of care. It was a huge, big range, but she polished it every day. Yes, it was a wooden coal stove. Had a water tank on one end, that kind, and so that. But the stove, when I first saw it, was probably 25 years old then, and it looked like the day it had been bought. It was her pride and joy. She polished it every day and shined the nickel. It got a rub down every single day, and it was just like viewing an oil painting. It should I'm going to find out sometime if that stove is still there or if they switched to gas, because it was really a showpiece on the ranch, and it was just almost as big as her kitchen. It was the biggest stove I ever saw, but it was beautiful. Call them and give them back. We're going to a country East Fork north of Payson. And there is one particular spot here that is just loaded with wild grapes. And many summers I have come with different groups, camped for a week. We'd pick all the wild grapes we could possibly handle, bring in our fruit jars, and just sit here and make wild grape jelly until we had all we felt like was the whole winter supply. But this is that particular spot. We're passing through the area east of Mesa and a little bit north of Superstition Mountain, where is the Lost Dutchman country, and from here we have a perfect view of the Weaver's Needle, which is supposed to be one of the central geographical locations of the Lost Dutchman mine that is so legendary in this country. that I have a little bit of first-hand information about the truth of the Lost Dutchman mine. People trek from all over the country, and especially from California. They're positive that they know exactly where the Lost Dutchman mine is, and they can. I've met some of these kind of people that dedicate their lives and their savings to come and locate the Lost Dutchman mine. Well, Brad Shirley worked, when he first came to Arizona, he worked for a vineyard place that made wine. They raised grapes and made wine, and the family name was Cuber. In fact, one of my relatives married one of the Cuber boys. One of my mother's half-sisters married a Cuber. The Cuber place was quite an institution, and Mrs. Cuber had extra rooms that she often rented. And the last days of the Lost Dutchman, in fact, he died in this place. He rented a room there, and he is supposed to have left this map, a map that he made while he was in his last illness. The Lost Dutchman, the truth of the Lost Dutchman is that there never was one particular mine. He used to come in from this part of the country where there was gold here and there. There never was a big mine, because even Helvetia out in this country had a gold mine that worked for a while, and Goldfields. These were small mines that soon just petered out. Really, they just simply ran out of ore. And he used to bring little sacks of gold nuggets in. But the truth of it was, there was never any one big Lost Dutchman mine. He brought it in from various creeks and places and small claims that he found from time to time. And so his maps were just a general area. But the legend grew that there was one fabulous Lost Dutchman mine, which is not true. That's what? Grandpa Shirley worked for the Cubers. He was employed. This is before he started his own vineyard, but instead of... Oh, yes. He knew him personally, and he told me this. Several times, and he used to laugh at the stories that were published and all the treks and the inspirations, and the legend grew through the years, and the false maps were published and sold to tourists and adventurous people that came in wanted to look for lost mines. And so this legend grew up, and actually this is a gold-bearing country. There is no question about that. But the mines are difficult to find. It probably has been prospected very thoroughly by today. But the truth of it is, the absolute truth, is there never was one big Lost Dutchman mine. He brought his gold nuggets in because he combed the whole country, and he'd accumulate them in his travels and stuff. But his last days and his last illness was right here where Grandpa Shirley was working. He knew him, he talked to him, he knows the map that he left. It was just an area. But this Weaver's Needle that we can see from the point we're traveling through right now is a central a landmark that people rotate around. It's in the vicinity. The Lost Dutchman mine, the legendary mine, is supposed to be in the vicinity of the Weaver's Needle, which is back not too far from Superstition Mountain itself. Well, in the early days of my married life, housekeeping days, we still used what we call sad irons, or these heavy irons that we had to have a hot pad in your hand to hold. You heated them on your wooden coal stove, and you had about 3 irons to work with, and kept returning them to the stove. and with a hot pad in your hand and a stand. I still have a couple of those irons, but I can use those clear back from my childhood days and still use them occasionally before electric irons came into use. There were gasoline irons that had a little tank of gas at the back of them, and that were used before electric irons came into use. And the first washing machine I had was called an Easy Washer, and it had. Oh yes, we used the washboard. I used to have a little Mexican woman, Maria, who did all the scrubbing on the board, and then I helped with the bluing and the rinsing. We always put the clothes through two different waters, rinsing water and then bluing water. And then we had no indoor dryers except little racks that we would hang clothes overnight, in your laundry area. Otherwise, we hung them outside. We always had a clothesline in the yard. But this washer had a rotating device that had 3 big suction cups on it, and it just, the movement was up and down. Suction, that was the Easy Washer. And it did have a wringer on it. We had to feed the clothes from the washer, feed them in through 2 rubber wringers that turned by hand. One terrible catastrophe that happened one day when Dorothy Tamburino was feeding clothes into the wringer, and she had her 4 fingers, her 2 forefingers, caught in the wringer with the clothes, with the other, folded the other back, and split her hand right down the center. So split it into 2 sections. It was a terrible tragedy. The second Easy Washer that I had a little electric spinner on the side, so that I didn't lose my soap suds. You see, the soap suds was thrown back into the washing machine. And that was the second type of washer that I had. See, in the type of washing machine that we had, when it we could do more than one load of washing into the soap suds bin, like doing the light baby clothes and baby blankets and the diapers and all, and the white lightweight things, and then we could put in the school clothes and the work clothes, especially, the work clothes and the picnic clothes and that sort of thing, and they could go through the same suds. It was a great saving in soap. Cars, the early cars that we had had just a sort of a porch top, like a like a surrey, yes. And then to make a closed car out of it, we had isinglass curtains that could be snapped on and buckled down. And we had to take extra special care of them because the isinglass cracked and broke, and then of course they were just like an open car. But for the first few years of our marriage, we used to go to the Chandler Ranch for Thanksgiving time, and it was usually very cold weather here, and we'd heat big rocks in the oven and put them on the floor of the car for the children to put their feet on, and put up the isinglass curtains, and it took us all day to drive to Chandler to be there for Thanksgiving dinner the next day. Tires was always a problem, because usually in an all-day trip like that, we'd have from 1 to 2 flat tires. Going in the first place, it was dirt roads, and rocky sections and crossing creeks, and there were very few, bridges over areas, and of course, the tires were simply not sturdy enough
they bruised easily. This inner tube was always becoming flat, and we carried things to mend our inner tube, and we even had a little hand pump. We'd have to pump up our tire after we got it onto the rim, and so it was a couple of hours stop if you did have a flat tire. But flat tires were just simply to be expected on any trip, because the tires were fragile. The rubber wasn't sturdy like it is today. Our top speed was, when we went 30 miles an hour, we were flying. One of the early day luxuries, and well, this lasted really for many years, I guess 20 years at least, I'm sure, that the grocery stores, at least Babbitt's Groceries, would deliver your daily order. They took your order by telephone, and before noon or in time for you to prepare for dinner, why, everything was delivered to right to your kitchen door. And yes, they had wagon delivery, and later a car delivery afterwards. But in the early days, it was delivered by wagon. But the grocery stores had that practice, which I think, I can't think of a nicer thing could happen to housewives than have your fresh vegetables and everything brought right to your door every day. And that was, they solicited they called you on the phone, or you called in, either one, but they had a special girl to take the orders, and clerks just filled up the telephone orders, and the delivery boy went out. Yeah. We didn't have vacuum cleaners for house cleaning, of course. This came with, the development of electricity and all these electrical appliances. And if you were going to clean your rugs, you rolled them up and hung them on the line, and beat them with brooms and turned them over and turned them back, and you beat your rugs, you beat the dust out of it and put them back down. We had little hand carpet sweepers, like you used to just pick up the crumbs. Bissell. Yes, Bissell was a household word. Everybody had a little Bissell carpet sweeper. The heating in our house was originally a coal furnace, and this is we used to. It was so interesting the way Daddy used to take care of the furnace, because he had to go down at noon and add more coal, and in the evening he added a lot of coal to one side, what he called banking the furnace, Then in the morning it was raked, but we had to take the clinkers out of the furnace and all. But the fun of taking care of the furnace, he made a sort of game out of it, and he'd have he'd take the children down the cellar with him. He'd always say, "Let's go kick the furnace in the stomach." And on the way down the furnace steps, there was a big cellar door that, went back, and he always kept a bunch of colored chalk there, and he'd stop and sketch on the bears tumbling down the San Francisco peaks, and he'd stop and make little sketches for the children on the cellar door. Being raised in the southern part of Arizona, I had the insane idea, which I know now wasn't necessary, but I thought that to sleep in the bedroom with a closed window was just contamination. I thought that a window had to be open in the sleeping room, so the bedrooms were closed tight, and the window was partially opened. And I would pin the blankets to the pillows on each side of the children's shoulder, on each shoulder, a big safety pin pinning the blankets on them so they couldn't, wiggle out at night. But we slept with open windows for the first few years that I was up here. And I finally realized that that fresh air can be warm air. It doesn't have to be cold air. But I didn't realize these temperatures, and I'm sure that we slept in mighty cold bedrooms for a few years until I figured it out some other devices. Yes, hot water bottles and hot bricks in bed were the thing, because I kept the bedrooms cold. And then I mentioned this before. When we traveled, we put big hot rocks in the floor of the car, to hold your feet on. So because of the traveling, because we had no heating or cooling in the automobiles at all. Well, eventually our furnace was converted into oil burning furnace, and we didn't have to bank it and stoke it and use coal. We had tanks of oil that kept it in. And of course, from that we went to gas furnaces. The children remember Maria, the little Mexican woman who was sort of our faithful house help for so many years. I don't know really how many years, probably 10 or 15 anyway, don't you think, Mary? But Maria was quite a character, because she doused her face with liquid powder. She looked pasty and painted, and it was just downright white liquid powder that she put on her face. So she looked artificial, and she thought she didn't look like a Mexican, but of course she did. It was also but she was quite a character. But she took a great interest in the children, and they liked to tease her a lot. They especially remember one day when she was carrying in wood to fill up the wood box in the kitchen, and they locked her out. And when she finally got back in, why, she whipped them all with a stick of wood.
She didn't speak any.
She didn't speak any English. We had to sort of make up with our kitchen Spanish, and of course she couldn't help but pick up some words. But we always had to speak her to her in very few vowels, mostly just words, consonants, and half Spanish and half English. In speaking Spanish, instead of saying yo quiero pan, yo quiero leche, why the children would say kitty kitty everything. She had several grandchildren, and I used to give her our discarded clothing, things. Instead of giving it to the rummage sale, I give them to Maria. And after a few years, I found out that she always turned around and sold them. She didn't give them to her children like we thought she was. She was selling them instead of using them for her family. The first time we had a colored girl, when Joe was about 3 years old, I guess, and it was his first introduction to real black skin, because the Mexicans were just sort of bronzy, He didn't distinguish so much between the Mexicans, but this colored woman was quite dark. And I used to let him ride his little tricycle in the house, in spite of the hazards. And one day he started pumping round and round in the room, and he said,
And
he asked what color is Sadie, and I said, well, Sadie is dark brown. And then he pedaled a little bit, and he said, but what color is she when she takes a bath? I always said our house grew like an old mother hen every time we had another couple of children added to the family. Why, the wings had to spread out a little bit more, a little bit wider. So we added rooms at the back until eventually, buying the house next door, we took off the second story and simply built, connected the two houses, which gave Daddy very much needed privacy. A den, an area of his own, really an apartment where he had room for a little workshop. He had a private bedroom when he needed it, and he had a fireplace, a regular little den with ours. So it added really 4 rooms to our house to the north, to to incorporate the next door, which was a good brick house, and so we just incorporated it into our home. A few years later, this gave us a big attic, and a few years later, I had that all refinished and a back porch put on, which was a great comfort because it kept snow from accumulating and adding a lot of dampness and cold to the house. And upstairs, I finished the attic and used it for